Oh, I'm here to recognize Mr. Deutch, and he's hiding from me down there in the first row. I recognize the distinguished gentleman and barrister from Florida before he became the distinguished congressman from Florida, Mr. Deutch.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for how much time?
3 minutes and 12 seconds.
For 3 minutes, the gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my friend, the gentleman from Tennessee, for yielding. And, Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to the so-called Lawsuit Abuse Reduction Act. Today, Mr. Speaker, is Constitution Day. And how is the House GOP celebrating Constitution Day? By trampling on our framers' vision of an independent judiciary as one of three separate but equal branches of government. The framers of our Constitution established an independent judicial branch because they believed that judges should be able to interpret the law without interference. They believed that only when judges were shielded from the influence of politicians and pundits and special interests could they issue rulings fairly and impartially. In short, they worked to create a system that shielded judges from efforts like the one behind today's Lawsuit Abuse Reduction Act. This legislation, Mr. Speaker, is nothing more. I repeat, this legislation is nothing more than a giveaway to corporate special interests that seek to price Americans out of their day in court. The bill restores a rule, reimposes a rule that our judiciary system abandoned over 20 years ago because it unfairly disadvantaged workers and consumers and other Americans that dared to take on big corporations in court. Our judges put in place this rule, kept this version that we use today of this rule 20 years ago, and they remain strongly in support of it today. That's because today's rule, Mr. Speaker, today's rule gives judges the flexibility to determine when to apply sanctions against attorneys who file frivolous lawsuits. This legislation flies in the face of our framers' vision of an independent judiciary. It strips our judges of their discretion, imposing congressionally mandated rules that drove up costs and clogged our courts when these were the rules before. We don't have to debate the harmful consequences of this legislation because history has already shown us how the 1983 version of Rule 11 tipped the scales of justice in favor of those with the deepest pockets. Mr. Speaker, too often, everyday Americans feel that they've got the cards stacked against them in our economy and in our elections. Let's give them a fighting chance in the courtroom and reject this frivolous bill. I yield.